is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 27 of The Grief of Politics. I'm here joined again with Avin Carroll. Avin, how you doing?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Good. This month we will be talking about the First Amendment because last month we did the Second Amendment, and I thought, Avin, what would be better than doing just going backwards and doing the First Amendment?
Let's just count down from where we are.
Yeah, and we'll just go through every now. Just to be very quick, the reason why I thought of all this was because it's been in the news a lot with the Twitter files, with Twitter being acquired by Elon Musk. There was a report, I think independently, that like hate speech had gone up. I think maybe it was internally their internal data, but there was people were getting banned, unbanned, shadow banned, and then obviously we always have to talk about cancel culture. That's a new thing. And so I've really just been thinking a lot about the First Amendment. You and I have talked privately about it, about what we think about free speech and stuff like that. And I figured we might as well just do an episode about it because we haven't. And it is one of the ways we're able to do this podcast is the First Amendment. So We probably should have started with that.
Well, we started this right after January 6th riots, and
right.
so
that's the big deal, right?
That was appropriate to be
appropriately big deal. Yeah,
it's interesting that we're going on this topic now too, because I'm watching the HBO documentary series Q Into the Storm.
Oh, yeah, you recommended that. That's on our list.
Well, there's a very brief period of time to watch it because it's coming off at the end of the month.
Oh,
The interesting thing is they're interviewing the founder of 8chan that hosted it, not the guy that owns it and runs it currently, but the original founder of it.
Oh,
and even he was like, "There's so much stuff on here. Like originally, I was all about the free speech, and now I'm like, I don't know if all of this is good to have out in the world." So It's a really difficult conversation to have. So I think this will be.
Yeah, I think for me, my general thoughts are that, you don't want people to, like Kanye is a good example. He went on a media tour and said incredibly anti-Semitic things. Is there something past anti-Semitism? I think when you say you love Hitler, there's got to be something past just anti-Semitism. He did say that with Alex Jones. You can watch that clip where he said I did
not go into it. I was just like,
he
emphasized
emphasized
off his rocker. The guy's insane. Like whatever. I read headlines. I never read any of the articles or any of his quotes. I probably should dig into it because it's everywhere about Kanye went all anti-Semitic.
Some people did respond to his comments online and say, "I am also bipolar and I've never been anti-Semitic." Even when I have an episode, I don't go that far. And anyway, the idea is, when he went on his big media thing, I don't want people to say that about another group of people. But I also, it's like almost for me, like a social, you're religious, I'm not, but almost like a spiritual test when you hear that to be like, oh no, you know what I mean? No, I reject all of that. But there was people who heard Kanye and said, yeah, he's making a lot of sense. In LA, there was photos from the LA Times of people on overpasses holding signs saying Kanye was right. So those people, in my opinion, failed the spiritual test of, should we treat everybody equitably? I don't know. Kanye's making a lot of sense with this hierarchy of Jewish people controlling everything, And so, again, I don't know if I want people to say this stuff, and we'll get into it with the articles. I focused on one state, unfortunately, right now, because they're in the news for trying to pass legislation that will affect what people effectively can learn about society and stuff like that. And so I think that is important. Again, I will go out of my way, and you and I have talked about this, to try to get a different perspective. I will watch Ben Shapiro. I disagree with him. I will watch The Blaze. I disagree with them. But I will watch them to be like,
not always.
Yeah,
once in a while.
Well, it's like a 10-90 split where you're like, oh, they had.
Hey, but that's the important part.
Yeah.
One of my biggest frustrations, I was thinking about this the other day, is like on this podcast, I particularly tend to be kind of apologist for conservatives. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, I do tend to be pretty conservative, but I think it's super important. I get really irritated when conservatives or liberals, Democrats or Republicans or anywhere in between, become so trapped in their ideology that they can no longer accept the merits of the opposing views.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's important to recognize that, yes, every once in a while, even if it's a 1090 split, you do actually agree with or appreciate the perspective of Ben Shapiro, Glenn Beck,
and some of it is just
even maybe Tucker Carlson.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I know I'm a Carlson, but he's not allowed in the meetings anymore. We had all the Carlsons had a meeting, and we were like, I think we're kicking that dude out. I don't think he's.
Wait a minute. Whoa. Just because he's got some different ideas, right? This is what we're talking about here, Joe.
Mm-hmm. This is where there's a river of difference between having a difference of opinion and inciting violence and stuff like that. And, anyway, well, plus it's kind of a sham now, right? I mean, we're not going to get into the Fox News stuff, but that has been well documented that their texts were leaked and they were saying one thing on air and believing another thing. So like now when he goes up there, I'm like, this is just pure entertainment and pure, you know what I mean? Like I don't take any of it. I'm like, okay, well now it's just not serious. Like I kind of knew it wasn't serious, but
so you
now
keep going down this rabbit hole. But I told you I talked to you the other day about the oh no, I can't remember the name of the host. HBO host tends to be pretty liberal.
Well, there's Bill Maher.
Bill Maher.
Yeah.
Bill Maher had Russell Brand on, and Russell Brand went on a whole tirade about it.
Yeah.
How it's not just Fox News.
No. But I mean, I think this was like.
We don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
We have our topic
that's a whole nother episode.
We can talk about the First Amendment. All of this is related to the First Amendment,
right?
But yeah, we should focus on.
Well, I think. What about you? What about you reading these articles? What were your kind of like?
Nothing surprising in any of it.
Yeah.
I mean, everything that was said was already in line with everything that I'm already aware of and know, right? Like, I think what DeSantis is doing in Florida is hilarious because on one hand, he's all pro free speech, and then simultaneously, in the other hand, he's oppressing any viewpoint that disagrees with his own.
Yeah.
And he's doing it because of his base. He's not doing it because he agrees with anything. I mean, DeSantis is one of the most opportunistic politicians out there. Yeah,
I think we may have to do an episode on DeSantis because I kind of find him fascinating. And I've tried to listen to, it's Crooked Media is the name of it, fitting. And the hosts used to work for Obama, Pod Save America. And they have other shows. Okay. And what I've noticed about that show is there's this real disconnect. I mean, they are literally the elites, right? They work for Obama. There is this like smugness on their show, and I listen to it and I kind of glean because they are talking to pollsters and like looking at data, and they know what's going on in Illinois with some House seat because it will affect the Democrat. Like they're plugged in. We're just dummies that read. As long as something, we're just dummies that as long as something isn't paywalled, we'll read it and bring it on the pod. Which, by the way, that was a rough thing. But and they can call people. They had Obama back on their show, so it's like we can't do like he doesn't care anyway. But there is
call him up. How many listeners do you guys have? I don't know, 10 on a high end.
3 subscribers. Cool. Like 7
I'll be there. I'll be there Thursday.
It's good to get my voice out there to those 3 people. There is this weird smugness there where I think. There was a clip floating around where Obama was basically making fun of liberals of like, basically people need to vote and whatever. And the response from progressives is, well, what have you done for me lately? We have all these issues on the books. The Democrats also have done nothing. Abortion not being codified, climate change, nothing going on with that. Like all these things. So it's like, this is a faith-based thing where you have to show anyway, but he has the right to go on there and say that. I have the right to disagree. I think what's happening with DeSantis, again, that may have to be a whole nother episode because as I was reading these articles, the first article I want to bring in is just from constitutioncenter.org because this just lays out a common interpretation of free speech. I'm just going to read it really quick if people don't know the full First Amendment. Quote, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or in the press. Oh, crap. Oh, they cut it off. Anyway.
Yeah, it's not the whole thing.
Yeah.
You can go to the original text. You can open it.
Where Amendment 1. Oh, yeah. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So that's Amendment 1. That's the First Amendment. Um, what I thought was interesting about this article was it came right here in this paragraph. Although the First Amendment says, quote unquote, Congress, the Supreme Court has held that speakers are protected against all government agencies and officials, federal, state, and local, and legislative, executive, and judicial. The First Amendment does not protect speakers, however, against private individuals or organizations such as private employers, private colleges, or private landowners. The First Amendment restrains only the government.
Correct.
So there's been a lot of talk about social media. What can we do about these social medias that all this, however you look at speech is proliferating, is there that's a rough word. I had too much coffee. There's too much free speech on these. How do we regulate these, Twitter and social media networks? There's a lot of talk, if you guys aren't going to do it, then the government's going to come down. But, obviously people don't want that. They want there to be some type of free speech,
Right.
So yeah, really do you have anything to take away from that? Because really, I just wanted to that was the for me, the most important part of that, of like what this is, you know what I mean? And what
I have no real takeaways from this. This particular article didn't tell me anything that I didn't already know. It may have gone a little bit more in depth. It gives a little bit more of
about like defamation, like
the case
threats,
history,
and they have case histories down of like fighting words, obscenity, child pornography. Yeah. These are the things, commercial advertising, like all that kind of stuff.
It goes through kind of the exceptions, or they even talk about like low importance to the amendment,
right?
Where the Supreme Court does recognize that it is protected, but it's very low priority in its protection,
right?
And so there is some use. I would recommend anyone listening to check out the links and go read it. It's a pretty short, pretty quick, easy read. It's not like crazy legalese interpretation, but again, nothing in it was overly surprising. I do think that it is important for people to recognize that the First Amendment protects from the government, not from private businesses or people, which is important because a lot of times where people will get up in arms like, oh, you can't oppress my free speech.
Right.
Well, actually I can. I'm a private.
Yeah, actually it's my platform. Just like whatever I feel about Twitter and Facebook and stuff, when they ban someone, there's been times where I'm like, why are you doing this? Or why are you doing that? But they have the right to do that. They have the right to step in and go, you're gone. And so they can lift that ban as well,
So watching that documentary on QAnon, it's really interesting to, like, as they kind of go through the progression of what happened, where they talk about Q-centered tweeters and specifically 4chan and Reddit banned anything related to QAnon pretty quickly early on in the process, which is why ultimately Q moved to 8chan.
Yeah, I heard about that. Sorry, I'm going to have to take a quick break. I know we're right in the middle of this, but my dog is literally trying to jump on my leg. I think there could be a problem, so I have to address that really quick. Sorry, my dog will literally start barking at me if I don't do that. So anyway, you're saying that Reddit banned 4chan and 8chan and all that, or QAnon right away?
Reddit pretty quickly banned it. 4chan pretty quickly banned it, and so Q had to move over to 8chan because 8chan was originally founded with like the anonymity that you get from 4chan, but with the open free speech component of Reddit. And so that was sort of the idea. In fact, I think the founder in the interview, one of the many interviews he did for the documentary, said like, what if 4chan and Reddit had a baby? And that was kind of what started him down the path of creating 8chan. And then the concept being like, let's have a completely open free speech forum where anyone can say anything. And so 8chan ends up being this place where people that are really extreme go and post stuff. Now 8chan still has to pull down things that are illegal. anything that's inciting stuff, they have to pull down.
Violence,
So,
right? Yeah.
In 2018 or 19, a white supremacist in New Zealand, and you may remember this,
I remember this.
went on to 8chan, was telling everyone he was going to go do an attack. He posted all this stuff. He went out and he live streamed on Facebook and other places his attack on a mosque in New Zealand.
I remember that.
The whole thing. Like, he's shooting from his own perspective.
And they had to like pull it down. I remember them pulling
as
it down.
he's shooting people. And so that was a turning point, kind of difficult turning point for a lot of governments and people talking about it, where like New Zealand and Australia banned 8chan because of it. And 8chan has had issues with child pornography. They have a giant community.
That's one of the things listed in the the high priority, or one of the priorities of protecting free speech is child pornography does not fall into that purview of free speech. So,
right. So it's a really difficult situation on like, how do you control and where does it come from? And I think one of the other things that this particular, I don't want to call it an article because really it's a breakdown of the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I included it is because I just wanted to like set the term of like, here's what we're talking about. And then with the legal stuff, here's the case study of, if you want to look towards this, they have precedent. If you want to look towards this, they have precedent, stuff like that,
I think one of the really important things too that they highlight in this article, though, is that the First Amendment is meant to protect the people from the government specifically endorsing a particular idea or oppressing a particular idea. Right. And so it can seem like it sometimes when we come out against hate or other stuff along those lines. But of course, that's, I think, common good to society. And even that gets difficult because the government is declaring that, like, hey, being anti-Semitic is an idea that is inherently wrong. So we're going to ban it. Right. It gets rid of the discourse. But where do you strike a balance? Because then allowing that conversation invites people into doing things like shooting up mosques.
Yeah, I mean, not just mosques, but like synagogues. Like there's in Pittsburgh a few years ago, there was a shooting at a synagogue. Like my thing is
a couple months after New Zealand, there was in California.
Yeah, and my thing is like, again, I think what Kanye said, and I mean, if that's who he is, then that's abhorrent. But I know what he thinks now. You know what I mean? Like I know it's like sunlight is the best disinfectant. Like we know where he is, and we're like, oh, there's Kanye. We know that it's probably, you know what I mean? Like it, by allowing people to say that stuff, it's like, you're an abhorrent human being, but I know where you are. And I know if you post this under whatever, then I know, it's, and shout out to the moderators out there that have to read and track this stuff and, just all day look at abhorrent photos and thing and go, man, does this hit the purview of like, I think really they could make a case for their job paying for therapy. I think that would be
well. And so if we move into the PBS article, article in question is on pbs.org, is published March 15th of 23. Doesn't list an author. Experts say attacks on free speech are rising across the U.S. And the interesting thing is, if we go back a few years,
they listed us. They listed Washington State, like right in the opening paragraph.
They do talk about Washington State right in the opening paragraph. But if we go back to 2016, 17, 18, there was a lot of discussion going on about the increase in hate speech, which this article also cites. And so because of that increase in hate speech, like you and I were just talking about it, now we know who feels that way. Like it's out in the open and it's public. Now, personally, this is my own viewpoint on it. I think that's always been there. I just think people had learned that in a good society, in a smoothly functioning society, they couldn't be open about it. They had to be careful and private about where they had these conversations.
Right. Well, now there's less shame in it now. There seems to be less shame in it now for a myriad of reasons. I mean, the left would just say Trump. I don't think it's just Trump, but I think there is this like, oh, I don't have to pretend anymore or what, how I can say how I feel.
Right. And so they're feeling more comfortable. They can come out and they can say it. They can be open about what they're saying. And so there was sort of this whiplash effect of like, oh, well, we can't have this out in society anymore. Like, we've oppressed this. This has been gone. But it wasn't really ever gone. It was just
It just went
in the
underground.
back rooms and
Right.
private conversations. And now it's out in public again.
Right.
And that's a good thing because we can continue to address it and we can
Yeah.
continue to grow. But there is that balance of at what point does that conversation in the public eye tip into somebody feeling like, hey, someone's got to do something about this, and them going out and attacking a synagogue, attacking a mosque,
Yeah.
and taking these violent actions. And so it's difficult, right? So in this particular article, like you said, it opens up it right off the bat. It talks about, and then later on, it goes into detail about an art exhibit in Idaho being edited. I don't want to say it was fully suppressed, but components of the art were restricted from being shown because of a law regarding abortions in the state of Idaho. Washington state, a lawmaker proposed a hotline so the government could track offensively biased statements as well as hate crimes. That bill didn't get passed.
No, yeah,
there
it
was
didn't make it
some
through.
definite concerns.
I think it was in
But-
Federal Way, it said too, because that's King County. I think I read the article, which I read the source of an article because, again, the original article was, I think, paywalled, maybe.
Mm.
There was something in the Seattle Times. One of the ones I think it was the DeSantis one, actually, that I wanted to like go to the Miami Herald, like the actual, who wrote, because they're quoting this in the Spokensman. They're quoting this Miami Herald article, and I couldn't get that because it was paywalled. So I did like the next best thing.
The next article's from The Spokesman.
The Spokesman, yes, which is in Spokane, Washington. I didn't know until I got done reading it. I was like, oh, because I just scrolled, and then if you scroll up, it says Spokane, Washington. So,
So the point being on that, right, is we end up having this sort of backlash in leftist leaning publications and left leaning Democratic progressive politicians that are trying to oppress what they're declaring as hate speech. And a lot of times it is hate speech. So I'm not trying to come down
how
on that.
dare they go?
But sometimes it's just offensive and it's not hate speech. It just doesn't align with your worldviews. And again, then we start going into oppression of viewpoints and ideologies.
Yeah, I mean, you and I talked about this kind of before the show about universities. It's kind of becoming a thing where they don't want to let mostly right-wing speakers on university. I don't agree with Charlie Kirk as a new example. He went to some university in California, maybe Berkeley. I don't know. He went somewhere to speak the past couple of weeks and protests and stuff. I actually don't know because I heard different reports when I was reading about it. If it was because there was protests, there was counter protests to the protests, there was violence. I don't know what happened. Some of them were violent. I don't know.
I mean, we had the shooting at the protests for, I think it was Milo Yiannopoulos speaking at UW.
Yeah.
Where someone actually ended up getting shot. I don't think they died, but like, what the heck?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be that the left and the progressives are the calm, rational ones, and then we've got these giant protests going on. I don't remember. I think it might have actually been someone that was pro Milo that was the armed one, but I don't remember the specifics. I just remember that it was giant protests because someone didn't want to hear something offensive, and that's also bad.
Yeah, because
I
think
can't have your viewpoints challenged.
Right.
There's some real issues.
And some of it, I think, honestly, like, hey, I was 18 or 19 at one point. I did go to college, and I thought much differently. But I'm much older now, and I would go listen to Charlie Kirk and be like, that ain't it, bro. Like, just from my perspective, I've heard him speak, and I'm like, that ain't it. But he, in my opinion, has the right to go to the college and say stuff and
make his case.
Yeah.
Actually have a conversation about things.
Yep. And again, like, I would just be like, I'm sorry, I can't. You're ridiculous. But go ahead, man. Especially if they pay you, get the money and make the speech.
I think if we even come down further in the article, I believe it was in this article where they even say, right, like it's happening across the board. It doesn't matter if you're left or right. It just matters where you live. Because if your viewpoint is contrary to the mainstream viewpoint in your area, then it tends to be that laws and society is trying to oppress your counterpoint to their own way.
Right.
So that's
right.
what we see with DeSantis in Florida, who actually has real power and is actually trying to push these policies through.
Yeah.
But we also, of course, see it here in Washington. Oregon actually did pass a bill for tracking hate speech. Oregon created a similar bias hotline in 2019 to the one that was proposed in Washington. It received nearly 1,700 calls in 2021, with nearly 60% of the reported incidents falling short of criminal standards, according to an annual report from the Oregon Attorney General, Ellen Rosenblum.
Well, you know what? Just to talk about that, I mean, although it fell short of criminal standards, you still can call someone and say, hey, is this good? Is this bad? I don't know. I just thought I'd make you guys aware of it. And they have people there to go, no, I'm sorry. There's nothing we could do. Now, that doesn't mean that can make, that'll make those people uncomfortable, whatever. Anyway, but
this hotline is not for like, hey, is this okay? This is a reporting hotline.
Yeah.
Which means 60% of them were, I'm offended by this thing. Take it down.
Is it illegal?
Is the intent.
Yeah. I've to be perfectly honest, I've actually seen hateful speech like spray painted, but they misspelled the hateful speech. And to be honest, there was a swastika involved, and it was not. I mean, I don't want to proofread someone's swastika, but it was all wrong. And I thought, if you're going to be hateful, at least get it right. Like, I don't know. Like, it just seemed there was misspellings, and I thought, man,
there's sort of a common narrative that if you're anti-Semitic or if you're, neo-Nazi, white supremacist, that you're inherently uneducated. And so, when you start seeing things like
what
that,
I saw
backs up.
What I saw did not help that case.
It backs up the stereotype.
I just think too, there's like Richard Spencer. He actually is back. He went on a podcast with some people I saw. He was the famous one. I think he coined the term alt-right. He was the one when Trump was running for office, or maybe first elected. He's a white supremacist. Proudly so, and would go on these debates. And I don't know, man. Again, it's when you hear it in your soul and you hear it in your ear holes, you're like, that ain't it, man. Like, that's not, you know what I mean? Like, for me, at least. But there's people probably listening going, he makes a lot of good points,
And right, like, it happens on both ends, right? When people have an actual educated argument behind it, and they can bring in statistics and data and information. And yes, people bring in anecdotes too. I think it's important when you're trying to make a case to humanize what's going on, as long as you can also back up those human stories with data. And we've talked about this about another host that we will not name in this particular podcast. Both of us have some issues with, because they like to do lots of anecdotes and very little data.
Yeah. But in other sections, well, I don't want to get into it. In other parts of their life, they like all data and no anecdotes. So anyway, It's like, wow, I don't want to, we'll get into that. That'll be an episode of.
So furthering down this particular article, I talked about the artist in Idaho that had gotten banned for art. And if we further down, and actually, like the next thing is the quote that I was talking about in this article. People in power target their political adversaries. So who is being silenced really depends on where you are on the map and its individual context. Right. But further down, it talks about an artist. Her name is Katrina, I'm going to say Majkut.
Yep.
Or
good luck with that.
I
also did not know.
Firsthand last week when artwork she had shown in more than 24 states over the past decade were unexpectedly censored in a small state school in Lewiston, Idaho. Specifically, the art that was censored depicted the two different medications that are used for the abortion pill to trigger an abortion reaction in a woman. Yep. And because of Idaho's No Public Funds for Abortion Act, the schools weren't allowing those to be put up, as well as some videos that talked about abortion as well. Mm-hmm. To which her response is, to be censored like this is shocking and surreal. She continues, if the most even-keeled bipartisan artwork around the topic is censored, then everything is going to be censored. And the reason she said that was because her artwork is specifically designed to be as, how does she put it? Who designs her art to be educational rather than confrontational. So she's really just trying to put data out there. And so that's why she feels this way. And I think specifically when we go into DeSantis and what he's trying to do about like banning drag shows at libraries and in public schools and public school
Right.
libraries and that kind of stuff. Um, right? Like people are really feeling like that is an oppression of speech, and so
Yeah.
you really start to dig into, is it oppression of speech or isn't it oppression of speech?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where I understand where if the state of Florida is giving you money towards like a university, in a way they have a stake in what is taught and whatever,
Yeah,
you know. But I don't know if something like this has happened before where it's so hands on, where the governor of a state is like, we're just not going to give you money if like I don't know. I don't know of any other case. I think with DeSantis, um,
probably.
yeah, well, with DeSantis, what's strange, I think, is there's such a doubling down. There's the quote unquote "Don't Say Gay" bill. There was he went after Disney because he said they were woke.
Mm.
Like there's just so much where it's like he's really just drilling into this issue, like you said. I think because of his base, and
Correct.
like, well, I can get these votes, so I
Yep.
need to totally
It's a
buy
hot button
into
issue,
this.
and it's super popular among the base, and so he's going to keep driving it home, right? Like, how much do you see conservatives hammering the point home of wokeism?
Right. I mean, one thing I did, with the grief of politics, one thing that the articles I tried to link brought up was the actual monetary cost. Like, okay, so you want to do all this, but it's being challenged in court. So, like, how much money are you blowing on this stuff?
Right?
It says other critics argue this is about the DeSantis article from
Mm-hmm.
the Spokesman Review. DeSantis keeps waging culture wars as more GOP critics emerge. I don't know, is there a date here? Oh, January 21st,
Yeah.
2023. But down here it says um, other critics argue he is failing to address the real issues facing Floridians, including their being priced out of the housing market to having their insurance canceled. And then someone said, quote, when did woke become part of our conversation, part of our lexicon? What does it even mean, unquote? Asked Barbara Peterson, executive director of the Florida Center for Governmental Accountability, a nonpartisan open government watchdog. There are big problems in the state that he is not dealing with. Like you said, DeSantis is using a hot button issue to fire up his base, Peterson said, but many of the laws passed by the legislature at DeSantis' prompting are being litigated in court and cost millions of taxpayer dollars, she added. And he's usurping legislative authority, she said, as he did with redistricting last year when he inserted himself into a map driving process. He's demonstrating his authoritarian power. This is not normal executive power. So, yeah, like this, it's going to cost people a lot of money. And then there was a quote here about, quote, Florida is where woke comes to die, unquote, DeSantis proudly proclaimed during his inaugural address a few weeks ago, where he rattled off a list of accomplishments of the past 4 years and said his administration had just begun to fight. DeSantis' actions of recent weeks came as his star is rising among conservative voters, simultaneously triggering a round of criticism from other potential contenders in 2024 GOP presidential sweepstakes, including South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, and former President Donald Trump. Noem said she wanted DeSantis and other governors to do more about restricting abortion. A day after one of her top aides accused the Florida governor of hiding behind the state's newly approved 15-week ban. Sununu said DeSantis' attack on wokeism went too far in attacking private corporations. So, I mean, not only is this costing people access to certain things, it's also costing people monetary money to challenge these things in court. There was a quote, I don't know if it was in this article or another one, where they said, well, you win either way. You either push the legislation through, you pay for it to go through, and judges agree with you, and now it's a law. Or if it fails, you can just fall back on well, these are just woke judges. They're just liberal judges. They don't care about people's freedoms. We're going to keep fighting this. So either way, you come out victorious in the woke battle. So
Correct. And
yeah.
there's a lot of sentiment around the concept of wokeism,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's
There's a new clip floating around. A woman wrote a book about being woke. She couldn't define it. That's kind of embarrassing. But anyway,
interesting. Yeah, there's a
I'll send you the
whole.
clip after this. It's she wrote a whole book about being woke. She was on a news program and she kept saying woke.
You should link it into the
And
description as
the
well
news
for others.
yeah, and the news person said, who's respected, she said, well, can you just define that so we're all on the same page? And she even paused and said, this is going to go viral, I can't, and then kind of stumbled through the definition, and you're like, that doesn't look good, that's not a good.
I mean, I hate to say this, but I mean, we ran into a similar situation with the Matt Walsh documentary where he asked an expert, a doctor, to define a woman, who
They
then
couldn't
was
define.
like, "No, I'm not."
I Part of me wants to watch that and part of me doesn't want to
Well, yeah,
watch
because
that.
you don't want to support it, but I think it's important to also like understand the
Well,
viewpoint.
I mean, I've seen other Matt Walsh stuff where I'm like, I don't know if I really want to. This guy takes some swings. Like he takes some real big swings. No, but I think, like we talked about offline, like all this like really made me reflect on like my education, especially with DeSantis really tackling like universities and stuff. And I did
Mm-hmm.
take like female studies and stuff like that. And I would tell my parents, this is what I'm taking. And they would grumble and stuff like that, but we'd still have conversations, and my parents disagreed with me, but or I disagreed with them. But my point is, if these things aren't available, like, what it seems like from my perspective, being the liberal hippie of all this, is there really seems to be this pushback of, hey, we want to teach African American studies. It's like, whoa,
Right.
whoa, whoa, what? And you're like, no, like there's an experience there that they have being American, like good or bad. We should at least talk about it, but removing that from the curriculum, it's like
Where is that being removed from the curriculum?
in Florida, you didn't hear, like that was one of
They're removing African American studies.
there's a university that had an African American AP African American studies program. And DeSantis said, we're not going to give you money unless you take that out. And they took it out.
A university
Yes.
had an AP class.
Mm-hmm.
So they were teaching high school students African American studies?
I'll link the article, but basically what they were saying is we're going to get money from the government. We have an African American studies program, and DeSantis said you cannot teach that. We're not going to give you money for it. You have to take. There was one part of the program, I think it was like homosexuality in African American studies, and he said if you teach that, we're not going to give you any money for your program. So they had to take that out, and then he allowed their program to go forward.
Okay, so they took out a component that was being taught specifically around homosexuality.
Right.
Okay. Because I would say like banning African American studies seems to be overtly racist as opposed to, subvertly
I mean,
racist.
I still think there's a problem. I still think there's a problem with, because a lot of scholars are like, this is still part of the history, of.
No, I get that. I'm
Yeah.
not arguing that. It's just that particular, I was not aware of that particular thing. And so I'm hearing it and I'm like,
I mean, it's one of the things, and I think he did win whatever the case or legislation to whatever the regulation was, because he had the power to do that, because I think they were getting money from the state. So he's like, yeah, do it. And they did it. And now people are like, man, what else is this a bad sign for what else we're going to have to give up for education? And again, I did read books by African American scholars in school, and they were very enlightening. But like, if that stuff gets removed, what are you losing? And like
But again, they're not saying we're removing African American scholars. They're saying we're removing a component of the education related to it. So yes, it's not good, but it's not as bad as you're painting it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll link the article. It did sound pretty bad. Like even if it's one part of the curriculum, like I still think that part. I don't know.
Part of it, that the particular part around homosexuality is a component that people should be aware of and actually be able to take into the narrative, right? Right? Like you and I are both white. We're not African American. We don't understand the experience of being African American in the United States. So being able to have a place where we can go, where we can be like, what does it mean? Right? I think back to, gosh, what is the movie? Chasing Amy, where the one comic book artist is a gay African American.
Yeah.
And he talks about the difficult struggles that he has. Right? And that movie came out in like 95 or 96.
Yeah, late 90s. I know that. Yeah.
And like, so we were having that conversation back then. So I'm not saying that it's not important to have that education, and I'm not saying that I agree with DeSantis having that taken out of the conversation, but I do also think it is important for left and right to have honest conversations about their viewpoints and not intentionally exclude information or intentionally conflate information to make their case. So,
well, I mean, the one
saying
thing I'll
they're
say,
removing African American scholars from the education when really it's like, okay, you guys can talk about all this stuff, but not this one component, is important.
yeah, but I mean, their argument is this is also part of the story. So by you removing it, it's like a censure of what we're trying to teach because it's part of our experience. You know, like you're just saying don't teach that. It's like, but that's part of our, you know, whatever. It's like I don't know.
It's a component of it. It's not the whole story of it, right? Like,
And
we're not
plus,
taking out everything about, slave ownership, and we're not taking everything out about
that has also happened recently, supposedly in a school. A teacher was trying to teach about slavery, stopped at the lesson, was let go, and he asked the people in charge, "Am I being let go because I mentioned slavery?" Because the way the law is written, the principal could not answer him, and it's not something where they're like trying to be cagey. These laws, like DeSantis is passing, are incredibly vague, and so, like we've talked about before, some of them don't hold up to judicial review. And so the principal is in a situation where like, I don't know what to tell you, but you can't keep talking about this subject. And they're like, what the heck? You know, it's stuff like that where you're like, that's really troubling. I'll send you that too. I'll send you that.
I mean, that's really important to our conversation on First Amendment.
Yeah. And do
so,
you think teachers though could be like, hey, I'm not supposed to tell you like about these certain things, but like,
I mean, I had a teacher that was like, this isn't part of the official curriculum, but blah 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 blah.
I did too. When we did biology, we had a Christian teacher, and
Yes.
he's like, "I'm supposed to tell you this, but here's another thing." And I wasn't offended. I was like, "Okay." Like
mind you, that particular teacher, because we had the same teacher, teacher was clear that this is my viewpoint and my opinion.
Yeah, he said that. He gave the whole spiel. I'm not, this is my personal whatever.
Right.
So
in high school. And the interesting thing about this in particular, right, talking about the AP course at a university is particularly interesting because that is most likely some form of running start or other education, because typically AP classes are for high school students that are doing it so that they can get some level of college credit.
Yeah, I also want to see, like, if this is a university class, that's adults. You know what I mean? They're all over 18, supposedly, unless it's running start, like you're saying. So, like, if you're an adult, could you counter challenge the thing and go, I'm an adult. They presented me with the syllabus. I can learn this. You know what I mean? Like, I can read over the syllabus and go, I want this. You know what I mean? Like,
the thing that's disturbing about these activities in Florida, and mind you, it's Florida, so for many Americans,
okay,
it's just
sorry, everybody bags on Florida.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. So everyone kind of bags on Florida, so we've kind of got that opinion. It's kind of like Alabama. Everyone kind of bags on Alabama in the South.
The Florida of the South, as my friend said one time.
The interesting thing about it, though, is that the state of Florida is having a large influx of people. Lots of people are moving to Florida. Mm-hmm. And I have to wonder, as I read stuff about it in the various real estate stuff that I follow, I have to wonder if a large reason that Florida is having such a huge influx of people is because of the news coverage around DeSantis doing these kind of things. And I really, again, I go back to DeSantis is a very opportunistic politician. Mm-hmm. I really honestly think that he's looking at what are the hot button issues for my constituents. And I'm just going to hammer those points home to continue to maintain and hold on to power.
Yeah. Again, I think we may have to do a whole episode on DeSantis because I think obviously he is going to run for president, I believe. And I believe he's going to, he's fascinating to me. The more I read about him, I'm like, this guy, I
think to some degree there's a part of him that I really appreciate, that he's willing to stand up against sort of the militant left's need to oppress the ideology of cancel culture. This is offensive. This thing bothers me, and so this person should never be allowed to have a career again.
Yeah,
and I appreciate that.
Even me being even me being on the left and progressive, I do not like the, hey, did you say this 5 years ago? You always see that on Twitter. You're like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like what?
I mean, there's a balance in it. Depends on what was actually done or said, right? Like Weinstein, right? That guy
Yeah.
deserved everything he got. Mind you, he
Yeah.
also got prosecuted, and the things he was doing was criminal.
Yeah.
The conversation around James Gunn, right? Like a lot of
Oh
people
yeah.
don't want to follow it because a lot of that stuff was hidden, and they kind of want to protect him. But some of the stuff he said and some of the people he was protecting are pretty gross.
Yeah, but he did also come back and apologize and say, I've learned a lot. I've, changed. There was a statement. And so it's
Right.
like, he seems to
But
like,
he did not get dragged like
Yeah.
a lot of other people did.
Yeah.
But, what ended up happening with some of the people around the Me Too movement, right? Like some of the stuff they got hit for was appropriate. But then on the flip side of it, right? Like, yeah, I made a joke 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 7 years ago. I put this thing up on Twitter. Yeah, I've learned and I've grown, and you guys are right. Like that was a bad thing, but like it
That's
doesn't mean that my life should be like my career and everything about me should be
yeah.
destroyed.
No, that's true.
And
I think what I noticed a long time ago, like a broad statement is, it seems like on the conservative side, they realized they needed to pick a battle, and they picked certain battles. Abortion is one of them. Wokeness, no matter what you think, is one of them. So they really focused on those, and they got votes, and people won in certain districts and whatever. I think what happens on the left is there's so much. The comedian who used to write for Dave Chappelle, Neil Brennan, had a comedy session. And he said the problem with liberals is when you meet a new liberal, you're like, if they say, "Hey, I'm liberal," you're like, "We'll see," because it's never enough to be. You're never progressive or liberal enough because there's so like that's what drives me nuts on the progressive side is like, guys, we really have to pick our battles. Like we're getting. In certain things, we're getting our butts handed to us because we want to worry about X and we really need to worry about Y. And we all need to shut up and get this done. And I think abortion was a great example of that. When those rights got taken away, everybody just zoomed in and focused on abortion. And you saw the repercussions in states that codified them in rights. I think Kansas and Michigan. And, the conservatives didn't do as well because it's like, see what we can do when we focus on one thing instead of like this shotgun theory of whatever, it's like, and so, yeah.
no, but I mean, even among conservatives are a little bit more focused, but I mean, in general, in human nature, everyone has their own hot buttons and their own concerns and their own very important issues when it comes to voting, legislation, like different priorities across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And within progressive liberal circles, there has been such a huge push and movement over the last decade, maybe 2 decades, towards I can't remember the acronym, but inclusivity, equality, equity. There's been such a push for that anywhere anyone sees any level of inequality, any kind of offense, like there's this huge, massive outrage within that individual because they're supposed to be outraged. And I'm not saying whether or not their outrage is right, just, or wrong, but those then become super hot button issues for these little people. And like, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And they all become these like
it's
pockets.
like splintered. And you're
right.
like, hey guys, we need to wrap it up and focus on something,
And then you end up with this overall kind of like everything is bad and terrible because all you see is bad and terrible. And then once you get to that point, like, well, how do you win? Like everything is awful. There's nothing good in the world. The whole world is out to oppress and break and crush everybody.
Yeah,
there's
actually,
no space to actually focus in on a particular thing. There's no motivation to anymore when it seems like everything is against your moral structure.
Yeah, I mean, I actually stopped listening to progressive podcasts because I was listening to 2. One of them was like a comedy, funny thing, but they were progressive and they had issues. And I remember at the moment I stopped listening was that we had all those, like I think like you and I have talked about, we've had an episode on abortion. I think it's a right, a human fundamental right. You and I disagree about whatever. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. So they also believe that. And it was right after, I think, Michigan and Kansas codified abortion into law so that those rights cannot be affected. And they were talking about it. And I thought, here we go, like some positivity. And they immediately were like, yeah, but I'm thinking when the other shoe drops. And I'm like, guys, we have to focus on the wins. And one thing I like about the other progressive podcasts I listen to, I'll share it with you. Well, we listen to it on the pod. It's called Future Hindsight. We did the Norm Stamper episode with the police. She has a lot of people on. And the last thing she always asks people is, what makes you hopeful about, like, they'll come talk about an issue and they'll be like, oh, thanks, this, and this. And it's like, that's how they end the interview, where you're like, there was one on education where they were talking about stuff DeSantis is doing and everything. And she said, that reading this was kind of depressing because of what's going on. And someone kind of cut her off. There was two guests, they co-wrote the book. And she said, well, you could look at it as depressing because of the things that are going on, but now you're aware of them, which I think comes back to our point in the pod about this may seem dire and terrible, but now Now what are you going to go do about those things that you know about? Like, I don't ever have to listen to Kanye again. When he comes out with another album in a few years or goes on another talk show, I'm like, I don't have to listen. Like, I can, but I don't have to listen to him because he's already, in my opinion, until he shows through action some kind of change, like I'm taking medication, I'm going to therapy, I don't have to listen to him. I'm like, I know are you going to say something about the secret cabal of people that are controlling your life? I've heard it before. I don't need to hear it again. And I think that podcast, Future Hindsight, shout out to Mila Atmos, the host, she ends the podcast with that question every time. She goes, we have to end, looking into the future with these issues, what makes you hopeful? And to me, that's the best way to end a podcast. So you could be depressed because they're usually about 45 minutes long. You could be completely depressed going, oh man, this issue, but then they'll come back and say, no, this is where we're, making gains. And many of the guests over whatever issue said, we've made gains in these areas. So we haven't won the war, but we're winning battles. And to me, that's more important. As I get older, is you want to hear the gains. You don't just want people to dump on you for 45 minutes and go, well, I don't know what to do about that. So,
and I think in progressive media, like, that is pretty much everything, right? Like, fear sells.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it happens on the other side of the aisle too. Like,
correct.
Yeah,
very much so. I will quote this probably for the rest of my life. It was one of the most profound ideas and concepts I've ever learned, and it came from a fantasy novel.
Of course,
the Sword of Truth series, written by Terry Goodkind, starts off the first, 6, 7 books. I mean, every book does have one, but the first 6 or 7 books have these different various wizards rules that are focus points. And I believe it is the first wizard's rule. I can't remember. It's been too long since I read it. Is people will believe any lie, either because they want it to be true or because they are afraid it is true.
Yeah.
And news media is media. They have to make money by bringing in eyeballs so they can sell advertising, and fear sells. And unfortunately, right, like, people get overwhelmed by everything that's wrong with the world and they just feel helpless and they can't fight back. And like you said, you really just need to focus on where's one or maybe 2 issues that you have time, space, energy to pour into it. And that does mean, unfortunately, there might be a group of people that aren't going to get your time, space, energy, money, and support, even though you feel deeply that they're being unjustly treated, marginalized, whatever it may be. And I do think conservatives have an easier time of it because there are far fewer things, or the concepts are more broad and nebulous, so it's easier to be more focused on.
Yeah.
Whereas in the progressive side of things, there's always someone who's being oppressed and marginalized, who's not getting the attention that they need. There's
and they might
idea or a concept.
They might rightfully so,
right?
But again, my thing is, like, I think the right learned that a long time ago of like, hey, we really care about abortion. Let's focus on abortion,
Right.
And
it's a hot button topic,
right,
to the broad base that everyone can rally behind, and it's an easy one to focus on. And DeSantis has very much learned that the concept of this is where woke goes to die, or Florida's where woke goes to die, has learned that really motivates his base and gets him votes. And so he's going to keep focusing on it until it doesn't. So on that more positive note, looking forward in this, like, the key takeaways, right? Like, free speech is under attack. But I think there is some real positives in the fact that we are seeing a lot of press. There's a ton of discussion. And I think that's very positive that we're having open discussions about it.
Plus, I mean, our podcast is on YouTube. Shout out to the 3 people again that subscribe and like and all this. But I can go on YouTube after the stuff in Florida happens and have scholars that are teachers black, white, whatever, go, let's talk about why this is bad or
Right.
good. And they can have a debate and you can watch that and go, oh, that was so enlightening. You know, like I have a book on real
And
estate.
for that matter, the same stuff that's maybe being restricted, that's not being allowed to be taught in the schools, is probably available in some form of discussion
Yeah.
on an open media format where you can still actually go find and consume it.
Yeah, I mean, I have a book on real estate, which I was going to give you. It was talked about, I mean, you know some of this stuff, but it talked about early real estate loans and how it it wasn't for people of color. It wasn't for different neighborhoods, redlining. And they go into the history of that. And I got it because there was a video I watched about systemic housing problems. And they just said, hey, they even had a screen. They said, if this is interesting to you, here's the books that we read to research this episode. And they showed the books on the screen and I took pictures of them. I'm like, this is interesting. I want to read this, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so that stuff is out there. You can get access to it, right? Like DeSantis only has so much power and authority that he can exert, right? Washington State, Oregon State only have so much power and authority that they can exert. And so I do really agree with the speaker that said in the other article, people in power target their political adversaries. So who is being silenced really depends on where you are on the map and its individual context.
Yeah,
and
where the call
really
is coming
matters.
from. Yeah, where the
here
call
in
is
Washington State. What was that?
Where the call comes from, basically, of like, yeah.
Here in Washington State, there's definitely a feeling that like if you're Christian, you are not okay to the overall broad state. Right? There's a pretty negative bias towards Christianity as a whole in Washington State. And there's a pretty broad sense and broad feeling that if you're conservative, you're not allowed to. I've read multiple accounts, or not allowed, you're looked down upon or judged pretty negatively in Washington State, at least in Western Washington. And I've read accounts of people who were like, yeah, I'm voting Republican, but I'm not telling any of my friends or my neighbors because I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah, that sucks. I had the other thing where I voted the other party and I got yelled at by somebody. So,
and there's that too, right?
Yeah.
But like Washington State has actually ranked as one of the least inclusive states in the country when it comes to politics. If you disagree with leftist progressive viewpoints in this state, you are definitively looked down upon and treated negatively. Right? Like when I was doing the whole online dating thing, I ran across multiple profiles that said, if you vote Republican or if you're conservative, don't even talk to me, right? That bothers me only on the face that says because of that particular thing, I have no merit in any other capacity as a human being.
Oh yeah, you can't even.
What does that sound like to you?
Yeah, you can't even have a discussion like a dinner date and be like, "Hey," which you wouldn't even do that on the first date. I wouldn't imagine, but a couple dates in, you could say, "Here's
an extremely political person might want to have that conversation right up.
Well, hey, too,
obviously, to these particular women that I was looking at and their online dating profiles, that was an extremely important thing to them, where they were like, well, they wanted it front and center.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anecdotally, there was a lot of people that voted conservative when Trump was running, and then afterwards were like, that didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. Right. You know, like, yeah.
So well, I think that's important that we recognize that like there is movement, there is growth in this particular topic. It's important that we're having the topic, and as it turns out, you know, Americans as a whole, by and large, want to protect it. And I think almost every single American would say they want to protect free speech.
Yeah.
Except maybe in this particular case.
Oh, you mean our podcast? No, Avin.
No. Like everyone's going to have their caveat, and that's the super difficult part.
A red line, as it were.
Where do we set our red line?
Yeah, because even people that are anti-Semitic, if people start talking about child pornography, that could be their red line. And I don't agree with either, but you know what I mean? Like you said, everybody's got it. One. Anyway, we're running out of time, but Avin, what do you want to plug before we go?
Well, I haven't been very active on my YouTube channel lately, but I'd still definitely want to point people towards it. Your Agent Guide. I've got a bunch of videos up with kind of just real estate information, useful tips, tricks, ideas to think through if you're looking at buying or selling a home or just curious about real estate as a whole. And then, of course, if you're looking to buy or sell a home anywhere in the United States, your Agent Guide also offers an agent matching service to help you find the
Yeah.
actual strong, talented, and professional agents in your area.
Very good. Very
to
important.
sort through all of it.
Yeah. I think when I got my house, I got for somebody who was out of state, which again, I got my home. I'm happy, but there was definitely some of the process I would have been like, where are you from? Like, do you know the place? Do you know what
Your
we're looking
agent?
at?
Your
Yeah.
agent was local.
Yeah. Maybe it was after they moved to Arizona, but like they weren't long for this. I don't know. Anyway, it worked out.
I do remember there were some definite things that now looking back on with working with your real estate agent and your loan officer, there were some definite questionable activities.
Yeah, I mean, everything worked out. We're in the house. It's been a long
Yeah.
time, but yeah. Anyway, yeah. And Avin, you're going to be on my podcast very soon. We're going to talk about stuff, which we'll do later. But I also do Gaming with Grief, and now it's on video this week, actually. They'll both come out on the same day, this podcast and Gaming with Grief. I'm doing video, a full video on YouTube, as well as audio on podcasting services. So again, you could subscribe to either of those podcasts, either The Grief of Politics, which you're listening to now, or Game with Grief, my other podcast. You can subscribe on either Apple iTunes, the Google Play Store, or Spotify. And Google Play Store is doing something very strange. Our podcasts are still on there, but I don't know if they're going to be removed. Google said something about, unless it's a bigger podcast, they haven't seen a lot of movement on their podcast app. So they're doing something. I don't know if they're delisting podcasts or just making it harder to find podcasts through Google, whatever. They sent me an email and it was very legalese. And I read an article about it that basically said people don't get their podcasts through Google, the Google Play Store. And so they're doing something to reprioritize whatever. Hopefully nothing gets removed. Everything's still up as I've seen so far.
Spotify and Apple are definitely there, and those are easily the largest places people listen to podcasts.
Yeah, and YouTube, obviously, we do video, obviously, on this. So please like and subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Tell your friends about two people that actually get along and talk about podcasts. And we do not do caps in our video descriptions. Avin and I have talked about that. I don't want to do that where we crush each other or destroy each other in caps. I'm very against that. Avin, we'll probably get off the call, and Avin will be like, why? We need to get more viewership. He knows about all that kind of stuff. I can't do it. Anyway, that's it for this. Oh, what are we going to talk? It's your turn to pick next month, Avin. Have you decided what we're going to talk about? Or
like usual, I've had ideas, but I didn't write them down on paper, so I haven't picked one.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to read what we have? Because we have an idea sheet here. We have oh, here we go.
Not at the moment.
Not that one. Okay. Well, it'll be a surprise then, and we'll figure out what it will be next month. So until then, everybody have a good month, and we'll talk to you again next month. Bye.